Hello and welcome, dear friends, as we continue this 21st year of the Turner Winter Series. I'm Maureen Raveno, and I am delighted to offer this welcome on behalf of Greg Peterson, the founder and perennial host of this winter series these many years. We welcome those of you who are with us this evening in the comfort of the Kappa Theater here in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as those who are enjoying this program virtually. Thank you for being with us. It is my great pleasure to begin our evening with a brief introduction of our guest, Andy Goodell, after which I will turn the conversation over to Jamestown and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Andrew W. Goodell, a practicing attorney who served as our Chautauqua County executive from 1990 through 1997, and then represented the New York State 150th Assembly District from 2011 through 24. For his final 7 years on the Assembly, he served as the minority floor leader coordinating all debates. A lifelong resident of Chautauqua County, Andy is a graduate of the Maple Grove School System, also from Williams College, where he majored in mathematics and political economics, and from Cornell Law School, from which he graduated magna cum laude. His professional commitments broadly encompass community-enhancing categories such as welfare and Medicaid, employment, health, social services, and managed care advisory. His community awards include outstanding service recognition for Justice for Children, community service leadership, community action, and county fire safety enhancement. And his civic and charitable services represent too many to recount here. As you can see, Andy's service to both our county and our state is amplified by his many contributions to the life of our state and to our Chautauqua County community. And so I am now very pleased to present Andy with Greg Peterson in conversation.
Ken Lovett, byline in the New York Daily News, entitled Assemblyman Goodell, second most famous in his own family. Who's the first?
There are so many, he couldn't count. Certainly Roger is well known. Before him, my uncle was a senator, replaced Senator Kennedy after he was assassinated. And most of that side of the family has been much more successful than I am.
I mean, it's clearly one of the things that wasn't that long ago. You were here at an assembly, and you picked up a sign that said for a bridge, or a bridge, and you had introduced it, and you'd made that a reality. Talk about that.
Washington Street, I think it was Washington Street when it was rebuilt. My uncle came as a congressman at the time, Charles Goodell, and was there at the ribbon cutting. And Roger and my other cousins were there as well. And so yeah, it was part of the archives with Uncle Charles and my cousins, and they were small. And they all grew up off of Fairmount. In fact, the Goodell home is right next to the Zion Covenant Church.
We'll talk a little bit more about the relationship. I mean, I've heard vignettes and excerpts from your dad. We'll get into that in a second, but between the Goodells and the Jacksons, because of what is now Fairmount Avenue.
3 or 4 houses down from the Goodells. And of course, they knew him as one of their neighbors. So whenever my uncles were in the Washington, D.C. area, they would stay with Justice Jackson. Of course, they didn't call him Justice. They, would call him Mr. Jackson or whatever. But that's where they would hang out. And so they were family friends. And in fact, here at the Jackson Center, you'll see a picture of the funeral and Jackson's casket being carried out of St. Luke's. And my father was one of the pallbearers, reflecting that family friendliness and history.
Was that your first entree, though, into the politics of it all? When you were the county attorney, assistant county attorney, and ultimately county attorney, how did that progress?
Well, as I mentioned, I thoroughly enjoyed working with the department heads. I mean, they were just fun to work with, and they were always pushing innovative ideas. And whenever you're dealing with innovative ideas, it involves legal work. You know, what can we do legally? How do we need to structure? So I was a county attorney, thoroughly enjoying it. Jack Linzer announced that he was not running for re-election, much to my disappointment. And so there was some of my friends and colleagues encouraged me to run. And at that time, there were 3 other candidates seeking a Republican endorsement, and I liked all of them. And they all had their own skill set. You had Jim Barney, I don't know if you remember Jim. Jim was a dairy farmer in Sherman who was unique because he read more books and was more literate than anyone else I'd ever met. And it was just an interesting juxtaposition. You had Abe Madison, who was then mayor of
Faulkner.
Yep. Incredibly dynamic, right? And Linda Malcolm, who was one of the best legislators, in my opinion, who was a kindergarten teacher. And I thought they were all great. They were running against Ted Smith, who was the dean of students at JCC. And, but I, threw my hat in as well. And after a few rounds, I didn't win on the first round. After a few rounds, I finally got the endorsement and ran against Ted Smith, who was a first-class candidate, and a very capable guy. But I was young and scrappy and energetic, and to everyone's surprise, I won. So that was how the transition occurred.
So you become county executive, and having seen it from the legal side, was there any surprises, though, when you finally had to go on the other side? You got the other side of the table. I mean, now you're the boss.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an awkward transition because, as you can imagine, I used to work for Bob Laughlin. Now Bob Laughlin was the personnel director, and I was his boss.
Oh, I forgot, yeah.
So I went from having him being my boss to me being his boss. And he would walk in after the election and said, "Okay, boss, what do you want to do on this?" And I said, "Bob, don't ever do that again." I mean, just don't do that again. But it was a fun transition, and then I had Betsy Stager first as county attorney, and then Steve Abdella as county attorney. And as you know, Steve was absolute gem as county attorney. Betsy went over to be social services attorney, did a great job there, but Steve was just phenomenal. And as young and brash as I was back then, Steve was rock solid, quiet, gentle humor. It was a great team working with Steve.
He was a counterweight to you. He was.
Yeah. And we had Bob Beckman, who was our finance director.
Yeah.
Now, Bob used to run Amoco's operations in Saudi Arabia. Retired. He had an MBA from Harvard. And one of Jack Linzer's recruits. And you'd go down to see Bob Beckman, and his desk would have nothing on it. His feet would be up on the table, and he'd be reading the Wall Street Journal. But Bob was brilliant.
He was
brilliant. So he's the one that came up and set up, we sold our tax liens, cleared $8 million one year. I mean, that enabled us to fund a lot of programs. I was sitting at an exit interview with the New York State Comptroller. And these are guys, with you're expecting them to have, goggles on, and the
Visor.
yeah. And the comptroller said, "We found a very serious problem with your finance department." I'm like, "Really?" And Bob's sitting next to me, and he goes, "Yeah." He said, "You issue your paychecks every Wednesday." I go, "Yeah." He says, "You don't cover them at the bank until the following Monday. Those checks don't have enough money to clear." And Bob Beckman said, "Of course not. We're not stupid. It takes 3 days for the bank to clear them. Why would we put our money in the bank 3 days earlier?" He goes, "Our payroll back then was $10 million. They're not going to bounce a payroll check. Why would we ever give them the interest?" And my mouth was dropped, and the comptroller's mouth was dropped, and they took it out of the audit report.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well, that certainly was Bob's, such a great reputation for just ability to invest, and you guys we made money.
One year, we made 10% of our tax levy in the bond market. I mean, it was the equivalent of a 10% tax cut just on Bob Beckman's financial acumen.
You guys were the beneficiary of the tobacco settlement, weren't you?
Yes, we were.
And how did that all play out?
So the tobacco companies were sued by the states on the claim that, you know, they caused cancer, which caused higher Medicaid bills, and they eventually settled. And that was my last year as county exec. And so that money came, and you could either take it as a lump sum or you could take it over time. And we had Bob Beckman, so we said, of course we're taking it as a lump sum. And so when I left as county executive, our fund balance was equivalent to about a year and a quarter of operations. I mean, you could have skipped an entire year of taxes based on that fund balance. Then my successor was able to use that fund balance for many years, over the next 6 years, to fund a lot of programs without raising taxes. So yeah, that was a huge financial benefit to the county.
So then you, after you left the county executive spot, by the way, was it a foregone conclusion that you were going to be Republican? Was your dad Republican?
Oh yeah,
Was he?
yeah, we were born Republican.
Okay. Because I know Charlie was a Republican. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, just before we were baptized, we were registered as
okay,
Republicans.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that was a given. Because of course Jackson was similarly a Democrat just down the road, and
Yeah.
I know there are Goodell, Jackson stories about how some of those presidential candidates,
Sure.
elections came out.
But, you know, generally speaking, back then, there's a divide between the Republicans and the Democrats. I mean, there is now as well. But the Republicans tended to want lesser government, lower taxes, more personal freedoms. And the Democrats, back then at least, were more concerned about safety nets and helping people who were down on their luck, and larger government and more expense that would come with that. And so, you know, it's now, you know, sometimes it's hard to tell them apart, other than they disagree with each other. But
So in between, say, the year county.
and by the way, if I might, those two concepts are not inconsistent. And so when I went to the assembly, well, starting as county executive, but when I went to the assembly, I said, look, you should apply traditional Republican economic principles of supply and demand and economics to our welfare system. You'll save money, which is great, one of our objectives, but more importantly, you can help people get out of welfare if you understand economics. And a bill that was carried in my last few years by my Democrat colleagues was a bill that I wrote that dealt with the way the current welfare system traps people in welfare. And what happens is, when you get to a certain income, you lose your benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates a brick wall where you cannot afford to make more money. And Danny Wegman, runs Wegmans, went to his top finance people and said, why is it my cashiers don't want a raise? He said, this doesn't make sense. I offer them a raise and they say no. Or they'll say, yeah, I'll take the raise, but I have to work less hours. And his finance people went through it and he stacked all the benefits. And he said, this is what happens. You reach a certain point and you earn $1 more and you lose your Medicaid coverage, or you lose your food stamps or your rental assistance or whatever. And so I was in a small prayer group, and the Democrat head of the Social Welfare Committee was on it, Roxanne. And I was friends with the Assembly chair. And I said, look, let's put together a task force and let's focus on how we can make the economics work. And when you do that, people can leave, they can afford to leave welfare and become more successful. And right now we spend billions of dollars to trap people in poverty. It's just, as you can see from my expression, it drove me crazy. So you can take those Republican supply, demand, economic theories and apply them in the social welfare system to help everyone. It's a win-win. The taxpayers save money as people become more successful. And by golly, they agreed. They co-sponsored the bill. It's passed. The governor vetoed it because it set up a commission that wasn't funded. Hopefully they'll solve that, and hopefully we can restructure our social welfare programs so you can afford to leave poverty, so you can afford to be successful.
Lisa, you were right. He's a smart guy.
In some areas, right,
Lisa?
Not every area.
But, you know, probably, I don't know if there's any segue of this at all, but I've got to ask. I'm looking at his resume, and in July 2002 through December 2002, after he was county executive, he was the interim president of the Mid-State Raceway, Inc. Now, and I look at this really impressive resume, but that stands out. You're president of a racetrack.
Yeah, Vernon Downs. So, Vernon Downs was an interesting client. It was a love-hate relationship. They either loved me or hated me, and it was like nothing in between.
How did you get there? How'd you get become Vernon Downs?
So, I was in private practice, having served as county executive, and I got a call out of the blue. And there was a law firm in Albany that represented Vernon Downs, and they were in trouble because they weren't following all the rules, and it's a very highly regulated area. And so they asked me if I'd be a compliance monitor, help them get it straightened out. And, you know, I didn't know what a compliance monitor was. I didn't know where Vernon Downs was. So I studied like crazy, and the racing wagering law is Byzantine, I mean, but I studied it like crazy. And I drove out to Vernon Downs, and they had had a change in management, and the new management was basically clueless on all the regulations. And so I helped them get into shape, you know, and after a few months they were doing things properly, and it was just a matter of detail, you know, but important details, and we got them through that. And they liked me, and so they asked me to help them with some financial issues. So I started working on that for them, and it was very difficult because I was reopening all their large contracts. And you know how tough it is to negotiate contracts, especially after they're signed. But I was making progress. I mean, substantial progress. And the way I would do it is I would call the competitors, get a price from the competitors, and I'd call the one that was our current supplier and say, you got to come down and match these, or we're going to break the contract. And it was difficult. It was very difficult. And the president didn't fully appreciate my negotiating. The president would call and he'd get a $15,000 break. I would do the research, come in with all the counter proposals and get $150,000 off. And the president didn't fully appreciate it.
Yeah.
And he went back on one of them and gave some money back. And I'm like, you're going to run out of money in about 6 months. And I couldn't do it anymore. It was too stressful. It was too much. So I quit. And about 6 months later, they ran out of money. And their finance people knew what was going on. And they ran out of money. So then a new investor group came in. They saw what I was doing. They hired me back. Now I'm in great shape again. Well, unfortunately, the new investor group ran out of money in about a year. And the first guy came back. First thing he did is fired me. Okay, so now I'm back out. He ran for another few months until he was out of money. And a third investor group came in. And the third investor group didn't have management licenses. I did. And so they hired me to run it in the interim. And when I came in with the third group, the racetrack owed me like $35,000 from, and I actually had to sue them, and I had settled it, and they agreed to pay me like $5,000 a month for 6 months or something like that, right? And when I came in now as the interim president, wouldn't you know it, the corporate counsel for the company was owed about $30,000. And I called him up and said, hey, Bruce, how about if we pay you like, say, $5,000 a month for the next 6 months? There was a long pause. He said, it's kind of hard to argue against that.
Yeah.
And so for 6 months, I ran Vernon Downs until my clients got their licenses.
I'll be darned. Now, did you lose all that information you learned about the state wagering law? Did you give it to your brother Rick?
No, he learned it all on his own, and he was obviously...
That's Rick Goodell, by the way.
Rick was working for the Racing Wagering Board, started after I did. I mean, I was running burn downs, and then he became active in racing wagering, and he did very well there. And then after I ran burn downs, I had, you know, a niche expertise. And so then I represented an Australian group that put together a $1.8 billion offer to buy Naira. That's Belmont Aqueduct in Saratoga. And the guy that headed that up, Carl O'Farrell, brilliant businessman, MBA from Wharton School. And that was fun working for him. We submitted this $1.8 billion bid to take over those 3 racetracks. By far the best bid. I mean, granted, I'm somewhat prejudiced, but it was by far the best bid. And Governor Spitzer turned it down.
Okay.
And when he turned it down, we were on a conference call, and someone said, they've got something on them. And by golly, about 6 weeks later, the scandal came out.
Yeah.
And sure as heck, one of the members of Naira, who was opposed to our bid, knew about it,
Played the card.
played the card.
Well, I hope you write a book.
But, you know, writing is one thing, selling it's another.
So that venture, which most people don't know about, ends, and they come back to the firm? Did you come back to the firm
Yeah.
then? And then, what's the, you know, we know you most recently as an assemblyman from 2011 to 2024. You were the minority leader pro temp for 6 years or so, a very vocal advocate. And was that a normal thing for you to come back and sort of look for opportunities to get back into politics?
No. Back then, I was very happily employed in the private sector as an attorney, and our firm was doing well. We had a number of attorneys that were working with us, and we were doing well.
At the time, known as Goodell and Rankin.
Yes.
Right.
And but I got frustrated with what was happening in state government. As you know, back then, my predecessor supported the Farm Labor Bill, which I thought was really not helpful. Supported giving illegal immigrants driver's licenses, which I didn't think was the appropriate thing. And they had raised taxes substantially. And so I was frustrated with what was happening, and it was out of that frustration I ran.
And you won?
Yeah.
And won?
Yeah.
And did you, of course, you're in a situation where you're a Republican in a democratically heavy assembly.
Yeah.
Was that, I know it's a challenge, but did you find it to be a challenge, or did you find it an opportunity?
A little both. When I first ran, by the way, this district, the 150th, was Democrat. We had had a Democrat assemblyman for 34 years in a row, and there were about 2,500 more Democrats than Republicans. So it was a difficult race, and my opponent, Nancy Barker, is very capable. So that was a challenging race. When I was elected, there were 17 Republicans that were elected. There was a shift from 37 to 50 Republicans. It was a huge shift. We went from being a very small minority to having 1/3 of the vote. And that changed the dynamics on the floor of the assembly significantly. And at that point, the Democrats were kind of reassessing some of their policies. And that opened up an opportunity for us to share our views on how we thought things ought to go. So yeah, so I expected to have a small office, freshman Republican, right? Minority, small office. I was wrong, Greg. When I got there, I had no office. I had to share a small office with another Republican. We had to share, it was just 2 small rooms, right? And at the end of the hallway, I discovered was a beautiful corner office. 4 rooms, beautiful furniture. Ironically, that corner office, which was empty because the Democrats were reshuffling all their offices, That empty office used to belong to my predecessor,
Oh, no kidding.
Bill Parman, who was, had quite a bit of seniority. So I was always friendly to the janitorial staff, because we all know they're the ones that actually
Absolutely,
know
yeah.
how things happen. So they unlocked it for us. And so whenever we had guests from Chautauqua County, we would meet in our alternative office, which was very spacious, with beautiful mahogany furniture. And then one day, my secretary comes in, and she was just a little bit dramatic. She closes the door behind me. She says, "Oh no, we're in trouble." Well, the guy I was sharing, the other assemblyman, was having a Republican committee meeting in our alternative office when Sam Hoyt, who was just reassigned that room, went down, thinking it was unlocked, put his key in, opens it up to an office filled with the Republicans having a subcommittee meeting. And within a week or two, I got my own small office.
Yeah, perfect. Well, now's a good time to talk about the story you just told me offline about, because there's a segue in all of this, with the Governor Cuomo, and how you were able to assist in getting some assistance to the National Comedy Center, because it deals with maintenance, guys, janitorial. It's all good. Tell the story.
So the assembly chambers are on the 3rd floor. The governor's office is on the 2nd floor. And so one day after session, I was literally running down the stairs, just as fast as I could go. And I went by the governor's office and started going down the stairs. And I'm serious, I was like running. I come around the corner, I almost ran right into the governor. He was walking down the stairs, and Andrew Cuomo, and he was in a good mood. And he said, "You notice the walls here. The lower part, it's a light pink, and the upper is more gray." And he goes, "Do you know why that is?" And I go, "No, Governor, I don't." He goes, "Wow, we've been renovating this Capitol building. And the bottom part, that beautiful light pink, that's where we've renovated." And I said, "Oh, that's very impressive." And he goes, "That's why I'm the governor. I know things like this." And I smiled at him and I said, "Well, Governor, that's good to know, because if this governor thing doesn't work out, you could always be head of maintenance." His staff, their faces were in such shock. And the governor, just for a second, looked at me, and I'm laughing. And he joined in. He was in a good mood, thankfully. He joined in. We had a good chuckle. And then I walked with him the rest of the staircases, and these are massive staircases. And I pitched the funding for the Comedy Center. And by golly, he came through with over $30 million for the Comedy Center.
That's right. Well, congratulations. That's fantastic.
And dealing with the governor and with my Democrat colleagues, and as lawyers, we can be in front of a court and argue, and then go out and have lunch together. And so I always worked hard at keeping personalities out of debates. And so if the governor did something that I thought was great, I didn't have any problem telling the Post-Journal I thought it was a great thing that the governor did. And at the same token, if he did something I disagreed with, I'd share that too. And so the governor knew I didn't dislike him, and that enabled us to have that rapport.
Well, you rose within the Republican Assembly ranks. I mean, you're a leader. You were a leader. And what did they see in you that made them a leader? You're very articulate, and as your wife has said, and I agree, you're a smart guy, and that came through. But it requires a lot of people within your caucus to do so. Did you get a sense of what it is that you provided that they desired?
I didn't mind debating bills, but before I would debate a bill, I would do the same thing that you would do as a lawyer, meaning I would read the bill, read the language, do the background research and review, and know what the bill did from a technical level. And so it was not unusual for me on a bill that was of interest to me, to ask questions. And they call them floor debates, but in reality it's a question and answer format. And as I mentioned earlier, I always tried to treat my colleagues with respect, but my questionings were specific. And they knew that. And so there's a lot of members who can articulate the political arguments, but fewer that actually read the bills and analyze the technical aspects of it. So at one point, there was a change on the floor leadership, and Tom McKevitt, who was from Long Island, incredible guy, was appointed floor leader, and I was fortunate enough to be his deputy. And Tom was an amazing floor leader. At the end of the session, we had this massive rush to pass bills, and we'll pass 200 or 300 bills in the last week. And during that process, we'll get 60 or 80 bills at a time every 3 or 4 hours. And so I remember we got like 60 or 80 bills, and I said to Tom, who was the floor leader, I said, is it okay if I just focus on going through these bills to make recommendations on which ones we think should go forward and which ones we should debate? And he said, yeah, that'd be great, Andy. And he then led the debate on his own while I went through them. When I got done, and it took me an hour or two, when I got done, I said, these are the ones that I think we should lay aside. He glanced over and said, yeah, I agree. While doing the debate, he reviewed them. Now, Tom was called home by his party leader to run for the county legislature in Nassau County because they needed him to have control of the county government. And that created a vacancy, and I was elevated then from the assistant to floor leader, and that's how I became floor leader. So if you watch the debates, you would come away with a false impression that I know more than I do. And it is a false impression, because what happens is we had an incredible group of researchers and lawyers working behind the scenes. So on Friday, I would typically get a list of all the bills that were coming up for debate the following week, or consideration for the following week, accompanied by a memo. And the memo would say, this is a current law, this is a change, here's an analysis, here's who's for it, here's who's against it, and here's their comments. And so I would go through all the bills, make recommendations on whether we all agreed on it or whether we should lay it aside for debate or whatever. The assistant floor leader would do the same. On Monday, we'd meet with the minority leader, my boss, if you will, reach final agreement. So then when we go out to debate it, I would have the bill text, which I'd reviewed on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the weekend before. So I had a general idea. And I'd have these great memos. I would try to recruit the chair of the relevant subcommittee that would have dealt with that in committee to lead it off on the debate. That would give me time to just refresh my recollection.
Yeah.
But great. I would stand up and, we're asking the Democrat sponsor. Sometimes they were assigned the bill, it may not even been their bill, right? And we'd stand up and say, well, what about this federal court case or this federal regulation? Doesn't it conflict with that? And of course, 2 minutes earlier, I didn't know anything about it, but it was in my memo, my briefing memo. Well, it got to a point where some of my Democrat colleagues, if we had laid aside their bill for debate, would come to me in advance and say, do you have a briefing memo on that? And what are your questions going to be? And I'm focused on policy. It's not my mission to embarrass anybody or put anyone on the spot, or with few exceptions, So I would often share the questions and our briefing memo with them. And sometimes I'd share the question and answer because I wanted to focus on the policy issue. I don't want to be arguing over some mundane fact or issue, I wanted to focus on the policy issues. Does this really make sense for the state of New York? Will it help us move forward? And as a result, I had that camaraderie with my Democrat colleagues, and the Democrat floor leader understood we're not there to embarrass their members or make them look stupid. We're there to focus on what really makes sense for New York and why. What's the pros and cons on a policy level. And that made the debates much more enjoyable and much easier as well.
Well, you're good at that. You're good at that debate. And
Most of the
I suspect even with the handicap of being in the minority, you moved the needle.
So we never won a debate. I shouldn't say never, almost never defeated a bill. And in my entire 14 years there were probably 5 bills that were pulled because they were so bad. But what happened now is the next year, the governor would sign these bills on the condition that they amend them. And we would have anywhere from 100 to 150 chapter amendments amending the bills that we had passed the year before, often reflecting the points we raised in debate.
That's the needle.
That's the needle. There was no footnote, I might add. There's no acknowledgement. But just one example. Lyme disease is a serious issue, and it's even more prevalent downstate. And so there was a bill that was introduced that would require a warning sign about Lyme disease posted at every state park trail, including every intersection of every trail, including truck trails, Jeep trails, including snowmobile trails and ski trails. Can you imagine skiing on at Whiteface Mountain and you come to an intersection, there's a warning about
Lyme's disease?
Lyme disease. And the problem is that you'd have those signs at every intersection of every sidewalk at like Niagara Falls. Yeah, welcome to the United States, check yourself before you leave. And the implications for the tourism industry was actually very significant, and it was gross overkill. So we debated. Got nowhere, passed it. Came back with a chapter amendment. The chapter amendment was, we'll put signs where appropriate. And the floor counsel for the Democrats said, Andy, be gentle. And so when it came up for debate, I said, I want to thank the bill sponsor for this thoughtful amendment. And everyone else knew what I was saying.
Yeah, that is good. That is good. Was there a moment, I mean, you are no longer the assemblyman, was there an aha moment where you said, all right, I've kind of, 2024, I'm not going to run again? Was that how did that conscious decision become real?
It's a long drive. And, so I typically drive home Wednesday or Thursday. It's a 5.5, 6-hour drive. Recover on Thursday and start again on Friday, reviewing all the bills, finishing them off on Sunday morning, drive Sunday night back to Albany, arriving typically 9:30, 10 o'clock, and start 9 o'clock in the morning. It wears on you. The drive wears on you. I bought some new tires and they had a mileage warranty, but you had to switch them every 5,000 miles. Or they went on to the warranty, right? When I bought the tires, I said, I'll be back in 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks, I had to rotate the tires. Every 2 months, I had to change the oil. It's just brutal. I mean, it's physically and emotionally brutal. And of course, I'm not with my wife when I should be out partying,
You should, yeah.
Yeah.
I can see why.
I can see why, too.
Yeah.
So in 2022, there's another quirk. If you die while you're in office, the state has a life insurance policy that pays 3 years of your salary to your widow. If you retire before you die, your widow gets a portion of your retirement for the rest of her life. My wife is younger than me. Hopefully, she's going to live longer than me. Hopefully. And so I'm driving these brutal drives through all kinds of weather, right? And I'm thinking, if something happens to me, my wife is really going to be financially hurt. And so I'm one of the last people that could retire. So I retired actually in 2022, was reelected, came back in, and Lisa and I, by agreement, took my retirement and put it into a community service account because it was really designed to protect her future, if something happened to me. And so for the next 2 years, I was looking for someone to follow me. And we finally met up with Andrew Molitar, and I thought, what could be better? Someone with the same first name.
Sure. Use the same, yeah.
Yeah.
Campaign signs, just
Yeah,
cross.
just cross it out. And Andrew's very, very sharp. Great family. We met with his family, and also very focused on policy, less so on politics. And Lisa and I were really comfortable to support someone that we thought would do a great job as our successor. And that sealed the deal.
So now you're retired. You're here.
Yeah.
And for the record, you have successfully concluded the campaigning as chairman of the United Way, which is a huge commitment.
Co-chair.
Co-chair, Lisa, and you, and kudos to you. And that's, I want to commend you on behalf of the community, because, you know, when I look at this resume, Andrew, and this is more in the form of a kind of a wrap-up, but you're you are the ultimate public servant in so many ways. And you look at the commitments you've made, when you read the resume, I will not go through them all, but the awards, the recognitions, the civic, the charitable organizations, they're legion. And both of you are part of that. I mean, it's part of your world. It's a commitment the Goodells have made. And it manifested itself by the United Way, which I think is probably the most trying and difficult, and you got a time-consuming, but you made it. You were successful. Congratulations. And I was telling
Greg, the congratulations really go to the staff.
Well,
We're
No. I know that there are times you guys spend a lot of time, convincing and using the art of conversation and persuasion.
We open doors.
You do. I mean, you're committed on many fronts. But I got to ask before we do conclude is, what's the question you expected you were going to be asked tonight, Andrew, as you reluctantly agreed to come and do this, and I haven't asked so far? I mean, this is your last chance to wrap it up, because you have the last word. I've known you too long not to have the last word.
Yeah, so I mentioned this to you at the beginning, that I was very uneasy about this interview. Because you head up the Lawyers Memorial Committee. And so every time one of our colleagues passes away, and Greg, you do a phenomenal job, you're there, you read part of their obituaries, and then you show part of their interview. And right after you showed one of our colleagues who just recently passed away, Paul Andrews, you mentioned you wanted to interview me. And I'm like, I'm not sure I like this.
So how do you think you'll look? You look pretty good here today. Don't you think, Lisa?
He does.
It will play well.
I hope I don't look, too old and frail. But I should mention, something you didn't mention. One of the first awards I got, which I was really, really excited about, was 40 Under 40, 1993. And I got that award after being nominated by a young attorney in Jamestown. Do you remember who that might be?
Tell us.
It was you. I've never forgotten that. So, Greg, thanks.
Well, and thank you for coming here today and overcoming that reluctance to really share an incredible life arc. And it's Andrew Goodell. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg.